Another rage-filled scream. Palmer licked the salt of sweat from his top lip and held his reactions in check. The king was no knave, yet the world had to think so. Palmer glanced down at his silent wife, fearing her collapse more than the king's. The high buildings trapped the stink from the near-solid runoffs from the privies, as well as the noise and heat. He hadn't wanted to come to witness this ugly spectacle, but she'd insisted. They'd travelled for weeks from their distant village of Cloughbrook in Staffordshire, weeks without much food, as they walked in a praying, singing throng of every kind of pilgrim, which grew with each day they neared Canterbury. Now they stood here as the sun climbed, fiercer by the hour, without the relief of shade or water. Fiercer still, the mood of those watching Henry's agony, the fierceness of the righteous. Palmer knew it well. And Theodosia stood beside him, with her stomach big, the baby she carried expected by autumn. But he needn't worry about her fainting. Despite her heat-cracked lips and freckled skin, he saw the clamp of her jaw, the firm set of her gaze. She wouldn't yield. She waited for her king. Yet her gaze flicked to their small red-haired son, edging forward through the knot of legs and skirts, curious to gape too. "Tom!" Her quick order brought him back to Palmer's side. Palmer laid a hand on the lad's slender shoulder. "Stay with us, eh? Can't have you getting lost." Not much chance of that. Becket himself could come down from the clouds, and Theodosia would still have an eye on the boy. There was a crack as another scourge met the royal flesh. The crowd let out a fresh roar, drowning Henry's cry of anguish. Hands, fists, and staves pressed at Palmer's back, tried to force past him to gape closer. He swung his son off his feet and plunked him on his shoulders as he held Theodosia to him with his other arm. He turned to those behind him. "Stop your shoving, you hear me?" A fat pilgrim with an even fatter wife glared at him. "You ignorant farmer!" With his breath a blast of tooth rot, the man's face shone with rage and heat. "I can't see past you and your—" He caught the full force of Palmer's look, and shut his noise. "Benedict!" Theodosia pulled at his arm. "Not here. We are on a holy pilgrimage." Palmer gave the silenced man a final glare and turned back to see the king's approach along the street. You ignorant farmer. Yes, he resembled one in his worn, patched clothes. He had to. If the pilgrim knew who he really was, what he, Sir Benedict Palmer, had done, half those here would run screaming from him, the other half would tear him to pieces. No matter that King Henry knew the truth, that Henry would say Palmer's actions had been justified. Henry himself was so close to losing his kingdom, losing his crown. Many said the king did this penance to make amends with God before he lost power to Queen Eleanor and her ferocious sons, rising in rebellion against him, and all Palmer and Theodosia had been through would have been for nothing. "Make way for his grace! Make way!" Canterbury's guards forced the watchers back with drawn swords. Shoved aside too, Palmer took a half-step to steady his stance. Tom's small hands clutched tightly at Palmer's hair. "All right, son?" "Yeah." His son's high voice hardened his resolve. Forget knighthood, kingdoms, battles. The murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, the murder that Henry now did penance for, the murder that he, Sir Benedict Palmer, had been present at. What mattered now was to keep his family safe. But if a king could fall, if a king could be swept aside, then where did that leave him? Theodosia Palmer clung to her husband's arm, her head pounding and her legs threatening to give way. Around her, the tightly packed, rough-clothed strangers robbed the air from her as their shouts of hate pulsed in her ears. Hate for Henry, her king. Henry, her father. The father who had allowed her and Benedict to be together. The father who protected their secret and continued to keep them from harm. She shook her head to clear her faintness. She had to hold on. She had come this far. The crowd had been firmly parted for the king's approach by soldiers. Across the street on the other side, the sight of the waiting, accusing faces, distorted in their yelling, vicious hostility, wavered before her. "There's the sinner!" came the cry from the pilgrim.